Ladies and gentlemen, friends, welcome. It gives me great pleasure in seeing all of you on our third and final Impact Masterclass as we will shortly welcome our two very special guests. This three-part series was brought to you by Aspire Impact. As many of you may know, I am the founder of Aspire Impact, a social enterprise in impact leadership and ecosystem development, and also the founder of Aspire Circle, a leading nonprofit developing social leaders in India through fellowships. We have about 176 fellows currently, and several of them are on this call. Over my 29 years of experience, for the last 13 plus years, I've been in India's social impact sector, and I've never felt the kind of momentum we do today that we are headed to a real nice place. And this pandemic has really become, a wake-up call for everyone who was sitting on the fence of saying, hey, if we don't catalyze the ecosystem around social and environmental impact today, we may be too late. So you are all joining this Impact Masterclass at a very critical time. So let me start welcoming both our special guests who support me in both these ventures. First, just want to welcome Geeta Goel, Country Director of Dell Foundation and a good friend. Geeta manages Dell Foundation's operations in India to transform the lives of what she calls urban low-income communities through improved education, livelihood, financial inclusion, and much more. Geeta is also on the Council of Governors of Aspire Circle and was on the inaugural board of India's Impact Investors Council, where I was the founding CEO. I've come to know her well, and she's clearly a rock star for the impact sector in India, and her focus is across the entire continuum, so there is no one better out here to talk about the entire spread from philanthropy to impact investing and everything blended in the middle than Geeta. So Geeta, welcome. Second, please also join me in welcoming Rajni Bakshi, a Gandhian scholar par excellence, an author and a journalist. Rajni is an award-winning author, a Gandhi Peace Fellow. She's chronicled many leaders, many journeys. And those of you who don't know, her book Bapu Kuti inspired the popular Bollywood film Swadesh. She's also the lead moderator for Aspire Circle Fellowship and moderator for our summer leadership program. So Rajni, welcome. Third and finally, I want to welcome Aspire Impact's inaugural cohort of 8 RISE scholars and 20 Aspire's Young Leadership Fellows who are all here and will be asking candid questions of Geeta. And finally, before we start, just want to thank our partners. I see some of them already, here. Nishit Desai and Associates, IVCA, which is India's Venture Capital and Private Equity Association, TIE, and Jindal Institute for Social Entrepreneurship. Jeremy is here from there. I can see him. I can see you, Jeremy. Thanks. So you'll all have a chance to ask questions of our guests during this impact hour. So without further ado, I want to hand over the mic, to Rajni Bakshi to take us forward. So Rajni, all yours.
Thank you so much, Amit. Namaste and welcome to all. It is truly an honor for me to be asked to play this role today and an honor to have a conversation with Geeta. So welcome again, Geeta. And so I thought maybe we would start by looking at a very overall question that since you've had such intense experience because you led the foundation's mission investing work globally at one point, and you have been in charge of the philanthropy side in India now for so many years. What are you seeing as the challenges sort of in between these two spaces, or both in these spaces and in their interface today?
Yeah. Thank you, Rajni. And before I begin, thanks, Amit, for the very generous introduction. And I was just thinking that if there was one webinar that I wanted to do in person with the people, it was this one, just because, like, again, a very big welcome to the RISE Fellows. I just think the energy and the enthusiasm that young people in a group bring about, and especially this generation, which is, I would say, much more environmentally and societally aware than I guess we were. Would have been just a great opportunity to learn from all the fellows. But and I look forward to that interaction, not in person, but I guess virtually now. Rajni, to your question on philanthropy and impact investing, and then my role even on the global side for impact investing. I would say, I mean, there are no challenges in the two roles. It's a continuum, starts with grant making, moves on to blended finance structures, which could be a mix of grant and capital, moves on to the high risk type guarantee and debt structures, to equity structures, and then at some stage it blends into mainstream investing. Mainstream investing, which is done at full returns, but for a positive social purpose. And the way I look at it is, frankly, to say that often we ignore it, but really there are three legs of the society or the ecosystem that we are a part of. One is the government, the other is the market, and these are two large aggregators, owners of capital. And the third is civil society or non-profits. And I would say, I mean, the reason we ignore it, I guess, is we get attracted towards where the money is, either the government or the market. And the very important role that civil society has always played and continues to play is really to give visibility to, things, aspects, segments, geographies that are ignored by either the government or the market, or are hard to reach, whatever. So in that context, given the role of the three, I would say grant making starts on the extreme left, saying here is a pool of money towards certain causes to be done in a way that are not yet market proven, or that are not yet supported by the government. And then as we move towards the right, I think always the attempt for us at the foundation, and I think for a large part of the philanthropic community also, has been, how does this transition to either the government so that it becomes part of the system, or is there a way to transition to the market? And I think that's where the different pools of impact capital, so to say, come in. And we've done a lot of blended finance structures where we say, part of the money is debt, but you get incentives if you deliver impact, or you take an equity investment, and these are not paid by the market. The impact incentive is paid by the philanthropic community. And then, yeah, so I would say no challenge. I think they complement each other. Often it is the question of making the right choice, what you're funding, who the other funders are, can this be supported by the market, can it not? And therefore, as a philanthropist or as an impact investor, are my funds best used as a grant or an impact capital? It's a very complex subject. I don't know whether I'm doing justice to it in the 2 or 3 minutes, but I think it's a good start to the discussion to say that these are all required. Let's look at it as one leading to the other than conflicting or competing with each other. And only when they find the right balance, I think as a society, we will be in a state of equilibrium. Otherwise, there will always be pushes and pulls.
True, very true. Do you find, Geeta, that sometimes you have to make hard choices between social impact and environmental sustainability? Or do these two things organically go together in more cases than not?
So Rajni, I'm really not the best person to speak on this as a foundation, and that's where a large part of my career in impact has been. Our focus has been more low-income communities, as Amit said. So a large part of our work is including and mainstreaming low-income people. From an environment standpoint, I mean, I'm just saying more as an outsider than an expert in the space. I do think there will be not think, I mean, I'm sure there are several instances where, easy, low cost solutions that can actually help a low income community in a village or even a slum is actually very detrimental to the environment. So, anything that is environmentally sustainable, as you know, are more longer term solutions. Sometimes they are the, not the easiest pick. I mean, they are the tougher pick. And when you're trying to get the best ROI to impact low income community, you may actually end up making the wrong choices on the environment side. So yes, it's not always in the same direction, but I guess we all need to make responsible choices as we move along.
That's true. It's a very complex topic. I mean, and water is one of the areas where that has been demonstrated a great deal, because it's often a question of who do you benefit?
Right.
Since water moves literally vertically, driven by gravity, those questions also come up. So, right, Geeta, your work has been more focused in India on what I think you call family economic stability. And this recent upheaval, the economic upheaval triggered by the corona crisis, is that creating new, I mean, how are you coping with it in a general sense? So that's A. And B, that are you seeing some new, both opportunities and challenges in reframing what you do? Because it has, again, in a very powerful way, revived the old question of why can't people get work where they are rather than having to migrate as they do.
Right. So yeah, let me begin with saying that definitely the pandemic has impacted, our target communities in a disproportionate way. So, to say that, yes, the world is all equal now and, the virus can hit anybody. I mean, yes, it's a statement. We are all in the same boat. But at the same time, the impact of it, whether it's the health impact, whether it's the livelihoods impact, whether it's the education impact, I think it clearly has a significant disproportionate bias on the low income. And the worry is that, anyway, we were at a significant divide in terms of economic income and social inequality. The bridge will only further widen. So a large part of our work is, both a here and now response, Rajni, in terms of the pandemic and, people who are losing jobs, can something get done? But also to say in the longer run, is this an opportunity to try and bridge some of the divide that it has created? So just to give you some examples. So before the pandemic, the informal gig sector or the tech platform workers was a significant area of focus for us, saying it's a good matching platform. Demand and supply of workers can actually be done through these platforms. And if, we were in the midst of a research, which hopefully should have also been shared with the government, to also indicate the lack of, social security benefits, the insecurities that people in the space were dealing with. Anyway, I mean, the pandemic hit and, a lot of that was glaring in front of us. So what we have as a, response to it, what we are trying to do is we launched what is called a Road to Recovery campaign. So basically for, arranging for small credit, easy credit being available to informal sector gig economy workers. So whether they were workers on, say, an urban platform or Uber platform, saying that, yes, there's a lockdown, few months, no salary or less, less work, less income. How do they sustain? So we really call it the Sustenance Fund, and along with several other partners in the ecosystem, this was launched. The other core focus area for us has been the micro entrepreneurs. And again, with the lockdown, they were severely impacted. Most of them, actually depend on daily or weekly earnings. So if you shut down the shop for 2 months, then may not even be the basic essentials available. So for them, again, we helped launch an MSME liquidity fund with our focus being on the micro entrepreneurs. And And I'll not get into the complications of it, but I think, leveraging other capital, creating stacks of capital so that there can be a first loss guarantee, a second loss guarantee, commercial capital can come in to add scale to it. So I think we've tried to bring together many different instruments and stakeholders, because at the end of the day, philanthropic pool of capital is what, like 1,000th of what the mainstream capital is. So somewhere we need the two to merge together and each to play its role. So that's on the road to recovery. Within this, our focus has been urban low-income communities, Rajni, and we've not really ever looked at rural livelihoods in the past. But given now that some of our target communities have moved into rural areas, and every day we are both seeing data on it, news on it. A few things that we are doing is, one, to say that yes, if and when they're ready to come back to the urban areas, are these sustenance pools of capital available to them? The second is to say that can we help both the government as well as private sector create matching platforms on skills and jobs? Because yes, certain sectors there have been job losses, but certain sectors are also seeing an increase in jobs, whether it's healthcare or logistics. So saying how we match skills with the job opportunities and do it in an easy way so that when they come back, it can be absorbed. The third area is, and there we partnered with Give India actually, to say people who've gone back, and even in the villages, yes, they are getting the benefits from the government, but are there people who are being left out? Can we help close the gap on direct benefit transfers? And can we also support some unconditional cash transfers just to tide over this? Now, this I call is a very here and now solution bias. This doesn't help us in the long term. What helps is, and that's where I would say we've been having many discussions, is can we create more livelihoods within the rural areas? But how do we help stem part of the migration? But those are all longer term solutions.
See, now I think there is a consensus among the top level analysts and data crunchers, whether it's at the World Bank or in private banks, that we are looking possibly at the biggest economic crisis, definitely since the Second World War, if not since 1929, the Great Depression. So in this situation, I imagine that foundations and impact investing houses both will have to make certain short-term strategies, which which are different from, as you described just now in your own case, the road to recovery kind of framing of the work you do. In this, how much do you see the dilemma between outright charity and impact investing? This issue was raised even in the Vineet Rai discussion, where he said that, look, we must be very, very clear that there is a great deal of support that is still needed through outright grants. And that he basically criticized the growing tendency to assume that the bulk of philanthropy should happen as investment. Because he said a huge section of people are not yet ready to receive investments. They do need grants. So would you like to say something about this dynamic in the next 2 to 5 years? How do you see it playing out? Because we're in a unique situation now.
Yeah. I think a great point, Rajni. And I think even pre-COVID, I would say always, we've said that impact investing doesn't solve the problems for the poorest of the poor. So, whether you call it the, bottom 15 or 20% of the economic pyramid, they are not able to really pay for goods and services. And therefore, a market will not solve their problems, but we need other solutions to them, which would need to be funded by philanthropy and by grant capital. I guess what the crisis and more the economic crisis and, the tail effect of it will show us is that that bottom of economic pyramid, which we were saying was earlier maybe 15 to 20%, does that move up to a 40, 45%? So I'm not talking about the poverty line and people above or below, but I guess just, the a consuming class in some ways. And the moment it gets to the 40, 45% level, then the segment or the market that an impact investee would have served becomes lesser. Because again, you will exclude the top 20%. This will be maybe the middle 30%. So in my view, there will remain a market for impact investing. And because even India's 30% is a large number. But I think for companies, for investors to be very clear what that market is, what that size is, what that share is, will become more and more evident. And I think even within our own portfolio of impact investments, we are seeing that, whether they're education companies or skilling companies that were targeting, let's say, the third quartile of India's population, so between 25 to 50%, which were not yet ready to pay a premium, but yet wanted to consume from the private sector. We are seeing that the crisis will definitely impact business models there. So, for instance, I'll just take an example. Despite a significantly large government school ecosystem, we have 50% of our children enrolled in private schools, a significant part of which is low-fee private schools. And if they are to survive, so schools which are giving online classes are still charging fee from their parents. But there's a segment of schools which cannot deliver online classes because their kids do not have access to smartphones or laptops. For them to survive a year without, taking any fee from the parents will be tough. It's also tough for the parents to say we'll pay a fee when the school is not performing. So I'm just saying many of those business models may not be there in 21, depending on how long this crisis goes. So yes, the profile of a typical customer and impact investee may change. And I do see a large or a fair share of the market going more towards sustenance, being supported by the government and by philanthropy. I must also say here, Rajni, that philanthropy is very limited. So yes, today we are all hands on deck to try and get, whether it's the basic essentials of food, medicines, etc. But the large pool of money is still with the government. And in fact, in a lot of places, I always say, philanthropy is not charity. As an individual, I may give charity and that's a very, I like this organization, I like this cause, I will do it. There's no long-term strategy. But I think a philanthropic pool of capital has a strategy and approach behind it. It's a long-term objective. So yes, the crisis has made all of us shift direction, which is right. But at some stage, everybody will go back to the causes. For us, for instance, education is an important one. So I don't know how, today we continue to support it, but yes, the focus has shifted more on livelihoods. But at some stage, we'll have to balance it again.
I know. I do have another question about your wonderful work on impact measurements, but I think we're running a little short of time. So I'll now invite the young fellows. Two of them have sent questions. Vrinda Arora, can I request you to please ask your question? Vrinda?
Yes, hello. So my first question is, if people can get grants without having to give any equity, why would they seek investment? Won't they try to put a facade of cause and see if they can get away with free money?
Yes. So I think people who take grants, you should ask whether it's free and easy money. It's not. It is free money, but it sometimes doesn't look easy money. But to your question, Vrinda, in most cases, grants do not easily flow to for-profit companies. For-profit companies typically would either invite investment, and the investment can come from impact investors, which may also do grants, or it may come from mainstream investments or VC capital, PE capital, as you know it. Yes, in certain cases, grants have also helped for-profit companies to create impact. And while different donors will have different rules, but I would say the one framework that most donors will follow is that, is my grant funding additional? So is my grant funding helping the company do something that it was not earlier doing? So for example, I would say that, in a lot of case studies, you would say Airtel or Jio is touted as a strong social enterprise in India, just given how much impact they have created, making either cell phone availability in the remote rural areas or even just the data charges that have dropped. But neither of them needed impact capital because they saw it as a business proposition. They reduced prices or whatever because they saw there was a market. They were backed by commercial capital. At the same time, not at the same time, but I mean, slightly different timeline and a different context, DFID gave some development capital or grant capital for the development of M-Pesa, which is a payment solution to Vodafone. And really the reason they did it was because commercial capital was not making it happen. And then M-Pesa became a very strong enabler in the African context for digital payments, etc. So I would say, it's never easy money. Two, it is, generally, if it comes to a for-profit enterprise which has the option of raising equity, it will come for a very specific reason, which the donor thinks is not being done by market capital. And then hopefully, I guess, always the hope that the donor has is that once the concept is proven, market capital will follow and this company will continue to service this market segment, which is not doing it today. I don't know if that addresses your question, Brinda.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Then we have Sia Marwa. Sia, can I please request you to ask your question?
Yeah. Hi. So my question is, the social sector is believed to pay people a lot less than the corporate sector, as it's appealing purely to purpose and commitment and personal sacrifice of employees. So why would you say this is so? How does this skew the talent market for the social impact? Will this ever change? If yes, to what extent will it change?
Interesting. So I would say, Sia, that, here you're only comparing, say, the social sector with the corporate sector. I mean, what we are not bringing in is that, many people follow their passion to play cricket or to play the guitar, music, art, teaching. I mean, many other professions or walks of life where they feel there's either a passion or a purpose or, they are best suited for. So, I'm just saying, just for example, a topper in, a computer engineering course may decide, he or she just wants to continue to work on coding and computer engineering, even though it is not the, as well paying as a consulting job, which would take him to places. So at some level, I think these are choices. At another level, I would say even within the social sector and the corporate sector, there are many segments, right? So yeah, certain types of corporate jobs will be much more paying than others. Similarly, and today the social sector is fairly large. So it is the non-profits. Within that also, there are the grassroots organizations that may not have as much payment capacity, but there are also very large, very well-governed non-profits, which would have, I would say, reasonable compensation levels. And then there are impact investors, which do try and be somewhat comparable with their counterparts on the corporate side. And then there are mainstream investors who are also trying to create impact, where I don't think there are any salary differences between a mainstream investor who's doing impact plus returns investing versus the other team. So yes, I mean, there is some truth in it, but I would say it's just a very large, you know, one brush type of a statement that you have made. But that said, I do think people who make a choice of being in the impact sector do need to be driven by the passion and the purpose, as you called out. Whether, because that's an important element, I would say the journey here is very different from that of a corporate sector, not just in terms of compensation, but in just in terms of you know, the outcomes you see, the kind of stakeholders you interact with, the kind of you know, sometimes the timelines that it takes to deliver results. So I definitely agree that the passion and purpose has to drive you to make the choice. And then, you know, compensation, I would say, is secondary, and there may be options which actually do not get you into a significant shift from, say, a comparable corporate sector job.
Thank you, Geeta. Thank you so much. I now invite Alia to ask her question, please.
Yeah, hi. So, with power to raise money, with power to give money and make lives better, leaders in philanthropy can feel like God, right? So, how do they stay humble and realistic?
Yes, I must say that I learned this lesson within 2 months of joining the foundation. So, you know, before joining the foundation for 12 years, I was in PricewaterhouseCoopers in corporate finance, where you were always, you know, on the sell side. You were trying to sell to a client, or you're trying to sell a business, raise capital. So very different type of a role. And my first boss at the foundation told me within the first 2 months, you know, she's like, you'll go to all these meetings, people will say how great you are, what a great idea, what a lovely thought. She's like, just don't get bogged down with it, because you know, I mean, just imagine that if you were a consultant saying the same thing, would they have still, you know, carried all the appreciation and praise? So I think that one thought comes to me time and again when I hear any good things said about me. And yes, I think the humility just comes, Alia, from being close to the work. So the more field visits you make, the more customers or beneficiaries you meet, I think it also shows you the positive side of the work, but it also shows you the amount of work that is undone and what more you need to do, and therefore the kind of collaborations and the partnerships that you need to make. And in order to do anything in collaboration, you always need to stay humble. So I think that, I mean, all those factors just help you be grounded. Yeah.
If I may, I would ask a subsidiary question to you, Geeta, that in fact, how do you deal with that latter part of what you spoke about? The, you know, awareness of the enormity of the challenges and what is, you know, what is needed to be done. And no one foundation, certainly no one individual in any foundation can grapple with the magnitude of the need that is out there. How do you find the strength within yourself to balance that reality with, you know, enjoying what you can do?
On that, Rajni, it's a tough one, because yes, you often get into that mode that, yes, you know, can I not solve the world's problems? And, you know, I'm sitting on a pool of money, can I not use it better? And I would say, I think the ecosystem that has been created with, you know, peer foundations, peer investors, with just people like Amit, I guess many Aspire fellows here. I think that helps you stay grounded and also realize that, yes, you know, while you have the responsibility to address the enormous problems facing us, we alone cannot do it. And, you know, you need more and more people. So I think at some stage, celebrating success, or, you know, just being grateful for what has been done, I think that is a practice we as a part of our team meetings often do. Because, you know, it's always easy to say, I've reached this milestone, I've done one state, now why don't I do the 20 other states? yes, they need to be done, but I think just always taking time to say, yes, this has worked, this hasn't, let me take this learning going forward. And I would say, I mean, it's not just the ecosystem. I think it's the people that create the ecosystem. So I do think the sector has attracted very strong talent and people who are committed to the cause, and that helps us all deal with it.
Thank you so much, Geeta. So Amit, I hand over back to you, because now we can take questions from the participants.
Thank you, Rajni, and thank you, Geeta. And we're opening this to all of you to be able to ask questions. Request if the questions be brief and really be questions, and come on the video and ask. I think we're all set. You can just unmute yourself. So I think if technically anything has to be done, I'll just ask our tech people on call to allow people to unmute themselves and be able to ask questions. And while people come up with questions, maybe Geeta, I can ask one, and I'll look for hand raises, etc. in the meantime. So tell me, look, it's amazing how much great work Dell Foundation has done for a long time. And, and when I look at, and I'm forced to compare this with our own domestic philanthropy, and sometimes I feel, and ask myself, are we as Indians giving enough and doing enough? And what do you feel, being in the position that you are? Do Indians give enough, not just structured philanthropy or philanthropy overall, and if not, why?
Good question, Amit. And I mean, I do think Indians give a fair share. Can it be pushed? Definitely, yes. I also think in India, the concept of philanthropy started much more as charity than philanthropy. So again, it was, or it started in the form of religious charity. So yes, we've had many business houses give towards religious institutions, or it and at a retail level it was much more charity, some orphanage, some old age home, some food, all of that. I think it's a matter of time. I would see some of the the tech giants in India now setting up their own philanthropy. So I think when the industry evolves and you have a team which is looking at it in a much more structured way, that team develops some objectives, goes towards it, looks at collaborations. So I would not say Indians are not doing enough. I'm a very proud Indian. I think we are doing a good share, but I would expect that in the next 2 or 3 years, as philanthropy as an industry becomes much more established, I think maybe the crisis helps expedite that. So yes, we may be a few years behind as compared with some of the developed countries. But they're there.
No, thanks. And yes, I hope so too, because I think this particular timing offers just a great opportunity for people to start being more struck. So look, we are open for questions. You can do a hand raise button or just unmute yourself, and we're bound to notice you.
Amit, we have a question from Savari. Can we ask her to come in here?
Sure.
Savari, can I request you to please ask your question now?
Amit sir happened to ask the same question that I wanted to ask.
Okay.
Okay, please ask me.
And I'm sure, Rajni, you have a view on that in terms of Indian philanthropy. Would love to hear.
I wanted to just mention, I'm sure most people in this gathering have seen that report. There was an amazing report I think done last year, by the Nilekani Philanthropies and the Melinda and Bill Gates Foundation together, which showed that actually in absolute volume, we are a bigger nation of givers than most countries.
Yeah.
But a lot of that, I mean, let's be in the, for example, I'm a trustee of CRY, so we call that retail giving. You know, the small 5 rupees, 50 rupees, 500 rupees. A lot of that is going to temples and to religious causes. But it's a very significant amount. So I think there is, as far as I know, there are some efforts inside the philanthropy discourse to try and direct some of that money to more systemic solutions rather than just charity. Though at the moment, actually, if a lot of that money is going to charity, that's great, because for the next year we are in survival mode.
Okay, can you see any hands raised, Rajni? Because I cannot.
There is no hand raise button.
Is there?
I can't find it.
Okay, so Pooja, go ahead. I think it's
Okay.
your voice, right?
Okay, I'm looking for the button and I can't find it.
Okay, so no problem.
So Geeta, my big thing was that, when impacting investing came in, there's obviously a set of social enterprises who are set up to receive impact investing, right? With obviously lower, obviously you're not looking for such high profits. There are social objectives, all of that. So one of the interesting things that conversations that I've seen happening internationally, at least, is of traditional NGOs like a CRY or many others, especially in Bangladesh, where they're looking at how do they carve out from their work projects or work that could actually fit into the social enterprise space. So does the Indian legal statutory framework even allow us to do that? Because when I explored that for CRY, I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah.
If I may add, Geeta, how much is the legal structure making things harder actually? Do comment on that also, please.
So I think to answer your question, Rajni, first, our legal systems do not make it easy to spend money, definitely as a foreign foundation or a foreign impact investor. So yes, I mean, that's one part of the puzzle. And, sometimes we spend a lot of money just trying to find the best structure to be able to support things. But to your point, Pooja, yes, I think globally there is a lot more traction around not-for-profits being able to hive off, 100% enterprises. In India, that is a challenge because it actually threatens your tax-exempt status at the holding company or, at your non-profit.
That's what I thought, yeah.
It is, we've had situations like that in the past where, in some of our microfinance institutions also, it was, held by their not-for-profit, but those type of structures are not well appreciated. I think we are still living in a world of complete silos of a not-for-profit, a for-profit and market and government. And I think in our work in the 12 years that we've been here in India, we've just seen that the maximum synergy and impact comes when you break the silos.
Yeah, because you see so many groups that are working on livelihood. They are within your project, but how do they sort of actually raise the capital is impossible. You have to keep raising grants.
Yeah. And the grant pool is limited, and if you can sustain it through revenues, why not? It allows you much more scalability. But yeah, either you just make them completely independent, but as subsidiaries, they are a challenge.
Because I always laugh that CRY is the original social enterprise, right?
Yes.
Right, for its first 20 years, made and sold cards, which gave us completely unrestricted funding.
Yeah.
But now we can't do it. If a CRY were to start today, it cannot be done. legally.
True.
Yeah.
Amit, can I ask one last question?
Amit, you're on mute.
Sorry, Rajni, I'll use your question for the gaps. We have 4, 5 names. Apparently, people have not been able to figure out where that hand raise switch is. It's in the participants panel. But, Pratyush, go. I see I have Pratyush, Pranav, Prabhu, Mudit all waiting. So, Pratyush, go.
Thank you, Amit. First of all, apologies for delay from my side in joining. I've saved it at 4:30, something like that. I don't know what went wrong with me. I wanted to listen to Gita, but somehow missed the first 30 minutes. My question was, Gita, with respect to impact measurement, there are a lot of tools and digital platforms available which are like on European standards. I haven't seen anything which is purely tailor-made for Indian kind of impact investment and measurement. Any work that has been done or anything, any updates in those lines?
Yeah, so Pratyush, I don't know whether you've seen the working committee report for the social stock exchange. They have actually suggested some measures, and I would say it's difficult to say whether they're for India or Europe or any other country, but I think they follow a good structure. And my view is, I think the impact space and impact measurement is such a complex space and so contextualized that if we try and find a perfect solution, we may never do. But at least if we start getting some basis of standards from a common reporting framework, and then obviously each enterprise or nonprofit can do much more. So I guess this is the base minimum that everybody reports on, and then depending on your context, you can add much more to it. At least it gets us started on a journey, and
I've seen
hopefully
that.
we'll move on.
Thank you.
But good to see you, Pratyush, after such a long time.
Yes, same here.
Thank you both. Pranav. Okay, Pranav, if you're not here, Prabhu.
Sure. I hope, am I audible?
Yes.
Great. So, hi, good evening, Geeta. Good evening, Amit. It's been great listening to you, understanding so many insights from impact investment. Geeta, I have a little off the beat question, largely related to your journey. So, you little while before you mentioned that it's a matter of choice when you switch from, say, a corporate to a development sector kind of a setup. And I've had a chance to go through a little bit of your journey, and I've heard about from you that how you transitioned from PwC to MSDF. I would love to understand a little bit, because this is approximately 12-13 years back, when impact investment was not as mainstream as it's getting today. What helped you make those choices, and any message that you would have for people who are aspiring today, especially who are looking to venture into impact investment as careers, who are still in the nascent years?
Yeah. So, interesting question. I would say what triggered me to leave from one sector to the other. At some stage, I feel maybe the move was quite late. I do think some inequalities, some issues in the society were always a problem that I saw, and most of the times I would say, okay, I as an individual can do nothing about it, or can do limited things about it, and one would just move on, and you're sort of on a path and you continue on that path. So I would say, from a messaging perspective, that I think always be aware of the things you care about. So things in your environment, whether it is income inequality, social inequalities, whether it's just the environment consciousness, whether it's waste management, whether it's political, religious, whatever. Like, I do think all of us have a few perks in the ecosystem that we live in, some more than the others, and therefore, always saying listen to your calling is an important element. And when that calling becomes strong enough, I think you will make the move. These are not any scientific formulas behind it. I just think how much you care about. But I mean, I think the one other message is saying that I as an individual cannot do anything about it is not right. I actually think each of us have the power to try and address some of it. And only if all of us believe and actually take the action, things will change. I mean, I think the crisis definitely has shown us that we are not in the brightest spot in human history. A lot of it has to do with our own doing. And therefore listening to your calling, actually feeling responsible for it and saying I can do something and take action for it. I think all of those things, I mean, don't brush them under the carpet. They are there, listen to it, and I guess you'll make the right choice.
Thank you, Geeta. And look, we're coming into the last 7 minutes. And so I have 3 people. I'll request all of them to ask their questions. And of course, we are holding Rajni's question for the end. So we'll get Rajni's question in. So, Geeta, you'll hear 4 questions together. And then we'll let you answer them. And then I'll request my friend Jeremy here to close the call. So, Jeremy, stay ready. Okay, Mudit, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Geeta. My question is, what would your comments be on the governance? Because the environment is so difficult. As a company, my business, I pay nearly 20% in taxes and I get nothing. So I consider that as also philanthropy. What would you like to comment?
Okay, so thank you. I'll let Geeta come into the, Josna Lal, you have a question to Josna. Josna is in cohort 8, Geeta. So, Josna, can you unmute and ask, please? Okay, Suresh.
Hello.
Yes, go on.
So, I don't have any particular questions. I sent it across to Pallavi.
Yeah, I was asking Josna, but it's no problem. Suresh, ready? You had a question too, right?
Yeah. Thank you, Amit. Geeta, this is a question related to the education. So thanks to COVID and the children of the high-end private schools have the opportunity of having the education through online platform. Both school and parent side, there is no problem in IT infra or the connectivity or transactions. But low-cost private schools and the government schools, they are the biggest sufferers. So do you have any thoughts and plans for the impact investment in this area?
So go ahead, Geeta. And the third the question which Josna sent via messaging is, do you think philanthropy also has a cycle, and is India, and in India, will we move beyond charity? So that's the third question. And then Rajni, why don't you take the last?
I will pass. We are very short of time, so I will pass. Please, Geeta, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so I think to Jyotsna's last question, definitely it's a cycle, and I think I'm very, very confident that India will move into the next phase. We will move away from it being a charity, and actually this is the time for a lot of philanthropies to also start looking at the future and actually building a stronger future for us. So yes, we have to solve our problems of today, but also being able to carve out a way for the future, and this is the perfect opportunity. Suresh, to your question on education, yes, we are trying to address some of that. It's not easy. Maybe I should have an offline conversation, but the 3 states where we are working in, I think a lot of the content curation, free content, free worksheets, all that has been done. But access and data still remain a challenge for at least half of the population. So there are broader discussions, and I don't. Part of it can be addressed with impact investing and phones on loan, etc. But part of it again will have to be government and philanthropic funding. Going back to Rajni's question of the segment that will be able to service impact investing will become smaller. So we should have an offline conversation on it sometime today. And then on Anand's question, yes, I mean, it's fair to say that what you pay as tax money is going to the government, and that's your philanthropy. I guess question really is, do you want to do more above and beyond? As I said, there are 3 legs: the government, the market, and philanthropy, or civil society. And civil society fills in areas where the government is not. So I don't know whether I got the question right, but does that answer what you asked or not.
Thank you, Geeta. And I know it's 2 minutes to go. Jeremy, do you want to make a comment and help raise a vote of thanks? Jeremy, please.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Hi, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for coming. This was a great conversation. And thank you, Ranjani, and thank you, Geeta, for this great talk. And it's great to hear from so many young leaders and young people also with their questions. And I highly encourage you to look at this social impact sector seriously. And I will say that we have an impact investing online course that's available right now, which Geeta is featured in a number of different lessons in that course. And it's on the Future Learn platform. So if you just Google impact investing and Future Learn, you can find that course. And I highly encourage those young people out there to take a look at that. Yeah, lastly, I'll just thank Amit for this series. It was fantastic, and really enjoyed hearing from different perspectives from across the impact spectrum. And yeah, I hope the conversations and engagements continue. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Geeta. Thank you, Rajni. Thank you all for joining. We are going to restart a series in October again in Q4, and a longer series with deeper conversations. But I think thank you for the very nice response. Geeta, I know you had a hard stop at 6. Wonderful to have you. Thank you for taking time out. Rajni, thank you for your moderation through the series. All Aspire Circle fellows who attended, all our RISE scholars, and all our Leadership Pro young fellows. Thank you all. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.